Risk number 3 is the illusion of safety, the comfort of seeing your principal intact while your purchasing power slowly slips away. So think about tools like high quality bonds, CDs, maybe certain annuities. They can keep your account value steady on paper, but when inflation is running close to or above your return yield, the real value of those dollars shrinks. And it rarely feels dramatic in the moment, which is why this is so dangerous. It's a slow erosion that shows up 5 to 10 years later as a thinner lifestyle. So you'll see it as fewer vacation trips, tighter healthcare budgets, and less margin for life's surprises. In other words, it looks like you have safe principal, yet the value is shrinking over time. So the key is not necessarily to abandon these instruments, but to understand their role and pair them with strategies that have a credible path to outpace inflation without demanding your constant attention. Okay, so what does this mean for investors? Well, buying power is what funds your life, not your account balances. In other words, if your nominal yield is 4%, but inflation runs at 3%, then your real return is roughly only 1%, and that is often negative after taxes. So over a decade, that gap compounds, and the result is something you're left with a portfolio that worked, numerically, but didn't keep up with the cost of living, especially in categories like housing, healthcare, even travel. So I want to go through a quick example of this inflation risk that you need to consider. Imagine $100 earning a stated 10% return for a year. On paper, that grows to $110 after 12 months. But if inflation is running at 3%, that same investment that cost $100 last year now costs $103 when factoring in inflation. So your purchasing power isn't the full 10% that you were hoping to earn. It's roughly the difference after inflation is applied. So the formula is stated return less inflation rate equals your real return. The back of the napkin math is about 7%, but the precise math is actually a little less. It's more like 6.8%. So you can actually use this example to expand it over time with the same math each year over 5 years, over 10 years. And then you can quickly see how much purchasing power you're losing at what feels like a compounding rate. So here's how to beat that trap. First of all, you need to understand what your own personal inflation rate is. Look at the categories that you actually spend your dollars on. You can do this by looking at last year's expenses versus what those same costs were now this year, right? So if you happen to do this exercise, and let's just say, for an example, last year's cost versus this year's cost, you have a 5% increase. That 5% is your personal inflation rate, okay? Because it's directly tied to what you spend your dollars on. Step 2, always calculate your real yield, right? So take that stated return less your personal inflation rate. That will give you your real yield, okay? As an example, a 3% CD, when inflation is 4%, equals negative income. It's -1, and that's even before taxes. Step 3, balance safety with inflation protection. Some investors pair fixed income products with real assets or alternative strategies to keep their income ahead of rising costs.